In the world of American politics, stories often unfold like dramas, full of twists, turns, and larger-than-life personalities. This is one such story, a tale of two men from completely different worlds who found themselves locked in a battle that would capture the nation's attention. One was Barack Obama, the former president whose name still carried weight long after he left office. The other was J.D. Vance, a man who had risen to fame not through decades of political experience, but through the pages of a book that spoke to the struggles of ordinary people. J.D. Vance wasn't always part of the political scene. In fact, just a few years earlier, he was known primarily as the author of Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir that painted a vivid picture of life in Appalachia, poverty, addiction, broken families, and all the challenges faced by working-class communities. It was raw, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable to read. For many Americans, it resonated deeply because it gave voice to those who felt forgotten by the system. But for others, it raised questions about whether Vance truly understood the complexities of these issues, or if he was oversimplifying them. On the flip side, there was Barack Obama, the smooth-talking, history-making leader who promised hope and change during his time in office. Even after leaving the White House, Obama remained a towering figure. He traveled the globe giving speeches, worked on initiatives to empower young people, and stayed involved in shaping progressive policies. To millions, he represented the best of what America could be: inclusive, forward-thinking, and compassionate. Yet, not everyone agreed. Critics accused him of failing to deliver real results for certain groups, especially those living in rural areas hit hard by economic shifts. These two men couldn't have been more different. Obama grew up bouncing between Hawaii and Indonesia, before attending prestigious schools like Columbia and Harvard Law. Vance's roots were firmly planted in the Rust Belt, where opportunities were scarce and dreams often went unfulfilled. Their backgrounds shaped their views in profound ways, making them natural opponents when it came to debates about policy and leadership. Things started heating up when J.D. Vance decided to dive headfirst into politics. After years of writing and speaking about the struggles of working-class Americans, he ran for Senate in Ohio. His campaign wasn't shy about criticizing the Democratic establishment, particularly the policies put in place during Obama's presidency. Vance argued that while Obama talked a big game about helping the underdog, his actions didn't match his words. "He left us behind," Vance would say at rallies, pointing to industries that collapsed under trade agreements and cities hollowed out by unemployment. Obama, of course, wasn't going to sit back and let someone tear down his legacy without a fight. Whenever Vance made headlines with his fiery critiques, Obama countered with reminders of what his administration had achieved. Healthcare reform, economic recovery after the Great Recession, and strides toward equality were just a few examples. Still, Vance's attacks struck a nerve, not just with Obama himself, but with the millions of Americans who felt overlooked during those years. The tension between them reached a boiling point at a bipartisan policy summit held in Washington, D.C. It was supposed to be a civilized event where leaders from both sides of the aisle came together to discuss solutions to pressing national problems. But civility went out the window when J.D. Vance took the stage alongside Obama for a panel discussion. At first, things seemed cordial enough. They exchanged polite nods and even shared a laugh over a lighthearted comment. But then the moderator asked a question that opened the floodgates. "What do you think has been the biggest failure of modern American leadership?" the moderator asked, looking directly at Vance. Without missing a beat, Vance turned to Obama and said, "I'll tell you what the problem is. We've had leaders who talk a lot about helping everyday Americans but don't actually follow through. Look at what happened to manufacturing jobs under your watch. People lost everything, and no one stepped up to help them rebuild." The room fell silent. Everyone knew this was a direct shot fired across the bow. Obama leaned back slightly, his expression calm but sharp. When it was his turn to respond, he didn't mince words. "It's easy to criticize from the sidelines," he said, locking eyes with Vance. "But governing is complicated. You can't fix decades of decline overnight. And yes, we didn't get everything right, but we tried. We made progress. That's something worth fighting for." What followed was a rapid-fire exchange that left the audience buzzing. Vance accused Obama of being out of touch with the realities of small-town America. Obama shot back, questioning, whether Vance really understood the scope of the challenges facing the country. By the end of the session, it was clear that this wasn't just a disagreement over policy, it was personal. As they walked off stage, neither man looked pleased. Reporters swarmed them, asking for reactions, but both kept their composure. Little did anyone know this was only the beginning. The sparks ignited that day would grow into flames, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic showdowns in recent political memory. For J.D. Vance, this was an opportunity to prove himself, to show that he wasn't just another critic, but a formidable force capable of taking on even the most iconic figures in American politics. For Obama, it was a chance to defend his legacy and remind people why they believed in him in the first place. Neither man backed down, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. This unlikely rivalry wasn't just about two individuals. It was about ideas, values, and the very soul of the nation. And as the story unfolded, it became clear that the gloves were about to come off, for good. The fallout from that heated exchange at the policy summit spread like wildfire. Within hours, clips of the back and forth between J.D. Vance and Barack Obama were everywhere. On news channels, social media feeds, and talk shows. People couldn't stop talking about it. Some praised Vance for having the guts to call out a former president, while others admired Obama's calm but firm defense of his record. What started as a single moment of tension quickly spiraled into something much bigger, a full-blown clash of ideologies that captured the nation's attention. J.D. Vance wasted no time capitalizing on the buzz. He knew this was his chance to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight. Over the next few weeks, he hit the road, traveling across key states where frustration with the political system ran high. At every stop, he hammered home the same message. For too long, leaders in Washington have ignored the people who need help the most. His speeches were raw and unfiltered, filled with stories of families struggling to make ends meet, towns losing their factories, and dreams being crushed under the weight of economic change. He didn't hold back when it came to criticizing Obama's policies. Trade deals that sent jobs overseas? A failure, according to Vance. Healthcare reforms that left rural hospitals struggling? Another missed opportunity. He painted a picture of an administration that cared more about big cities and coastal elites than the working-class communities in the heartland, and he did it with a mix of anger and conviction that resonated deeply with many listeners. But Vance wasn't just throwing punches blindly. He came prepared. Before each event, he and his team dug deep into data, pulling out statistics and anecdotes to back up his claims. They highlighted real-life examples of places where unemployment had skyrocketed after certain trade agreements were signed, or where schools had closed because funding dried up. It wasn't just rhetoric, it felt personal, like he was speaking directly to the pain people felt every day. That authenticity drew crowds, sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands, all eager to hear what he had to say next. Meanwhile, Barack Obama wasn't about to let these accusations go unanswered. Though he was no longer in office, he still carried immense influence. Rather than retreating, he leaned in, using his platform to push back against Vance's narrative. In interviews and public appearances, he dismantled Vance's arguments piece by piece. When Vance criticized trade deals, Obama explained the complexities behind those decisions, the global competition, the need to balance domestic interests with international partnerships, and the long-term benefits they brought to some industries. When Vance attacked healthcare reform, Obama countered by pointing to the millions of Americans who gained access to insurance for the first time. What I find made Obama's responses particularly effective was how he combined logic with emotion. Sure, he could rattle off numbers and policy details with ease, but he also shared stories, real human stories, of people whose lives had improved because of his administration's work. He talked about a single mother who finally got affordable health coverage, a factory worker retrained for a new job through federal programs, and a veteran receiving better care thanks to expanded services. These weren't abstract concepts. They were tangible examples of progress, and they struck a chord with many Americans. Despite their differences, there was one thing both men understood perfectly. This wasn't just about policy. It was about identity, values, and trust. For Vance, it was about proving that he represented the voice of the forgotten, the people who felt abandoned by leaders who promised them hope but delivered disappointment. For Obama, it was about defending not just his own legacy but the broader vision of progress and inclusion he believed in. Both sides were fighting for something bigger than themselves, and that made the stakes even higher. As the debate raged on, it began to take on a life of its own. News outlets covered every twist and turn, analyzing everything from Vance's tone to Obama's body language. Social media exploded with memes, hashtags, and hot takes. Supporters of both men clashed online, turning comment sections into battlegrounds. Late-night comedians joked about the feud, adding fuel to the fire. Even casual observers found themselves drawn in, unable to look away as the drama unfolded. Rumors swirled about whether another face-to-face showdown might happen. Would Vance demand a rematch? Would Obama agree to it? The idea of a live televised debate between the two became a tantalizing possibility. Analysts speculated endlessly about who would win, dissecting their strengths and weaknesses. Vance's boldness and ability to connect with working-class voters made him a formidable opponent. But Obama's experience and charisma were unmatched, and he had years of practice handling tough questions under pressure. For Vance, the prospect of a debate was thrilling. It was a chance to prove himself on the biggest stage possible, to show that he could go toe-to-toe with one of the most respected figures in modern politics. For Obama, it was an opportunity to reaffirm his place in history, to remind people why they trusted him in the first place. Both men knew that such an event wouldn't just be about winning or losing, it would be about defining the future of American politics. As anticipation built, both camps went into overdrive. Vance's team worked tirelessly to prepare him, studying Obama's past debates and crafting strategies to exploit any perceived weaknesses. They focused on sharpening his delivery, making sure he came across as relatable yet authoritative. Meanwhile, Obama's advisors mapped out counter-arguments, anticipating every possible angle Vance might take. They encouraged him to lean into his natural strengths, his ability to stay composed under pressure, and his knack for connecting with audiences emotionally. Behind the scenes, both men were fully aware of what was at stake. For Vance, this was his moment to cement his status as a rising star in the Republican Party. Success could propel him to even greater heights, opening doors to national prominence and potentially reshaping the party's direction. Failure, on the other hand, could tarnish his reputation before he even got started. For Obama, the stakes were different but equally significant. While he didn't need to prove anything to secure his place in history, he did feel a responsibility to defend the ideals he stood for. He knew that Vance's criticisms weren't just aimed at him personally. They were attacks on the very principles of progressivism. If he didn't push back effectively, it could embolden critics and undermine the gains made during his presidency. And so, as the nation waited anxiously for the next chapter in this unfolding saga, one thing was clear: neither man was backing down. The gloves were off and the battle lines were drawn. Whether it played out in a formal debate or continued through speeches, interviews, and rallies, the clash between J.D. Vance and Barack Obama was far from over. It was a contest of ideas, personalities, and visions for America's future, and everyone was watching. The buzz around the potential showdown between J.D. Vance and Barack Obama reached a fever pitch. People were talking about it everywhere, at dinner tables, in coffee shops, and even at work. It felt like the entire country was holding its breath, waiting to see if these two very different men would face off again. The idea of watching them go head-to-head on live television was electric, and both sides knew it. This wasn't just another political debate. It was shaping up to be a defining moment for both men, and maybe even for the nation itself. Behind the scenes, preparations were intense. For J.D. Vance, this was his chance to prove himself as more than just a critic. He wanted to show that he could stand shoulder to shoulder with one of the most iconic leaders in modern history and hold his own. But he also knew that going up against someone like Obama wasn't going to be easy. Vance wasn't a seasoned politician with decades of experience under his belt. He was still relatively new to this world, and while his charisma and boldness had gotten him far, He needed to step up his game. Vance assembled a tight-knit team of strategists, researchers, and advisors who worked around the clock to prepare him. They pored over every speech Obama had ever given, every interview he'd done, and every policy decision he'd made during his presidency. Their goal was simple: find the weak spots. They looked for inconsistencies, gaps in logic, or moments where Obama's actions didn't align with his promises. It wasn't just about attacking him personally. It was about exposing flaws in the policies that shaped his legacy. But preparation wasn't just about research. Vance spent hours practicing his delivery. He rehearsed answers to potential questions, worked on controlling his tone, and fine-tuned his body language. His team pushed him hard, throwing tough questions his way and challenging him to think on his feet. They reminded him constantly that this wasn't just about winning arguments, it was about connecting with people. If he came across as too aggressive or rehearsed, he risked alienating the audience. On the other hand, if he seemed unsure or hesitant, Obama would eat him alive. Finding the right balance was crucial. For Barack Obama, the stakes were different, but no less important. Unlike Vance, he didn't need to prove himself. His place in history was already secure. But he understood that this debate wasn't just about him. It was about the values and principles he stood for. If Vance succeeded in painting his presidency as a failure, it wouldn't just tarnish his reputation. It could undermine the progressive movement he helped build. That meant Obama couldn't afford to take this lightly. Obama's preparation process was methodical and disciplined. He surrounded himself with trusted advisors who knew him inside and out. Together, they mapped out strategies to counter Vance's attacks while reinforcing the achievements of his administration. They anticipated every angle Vance might take, whether it was criticizing trade deals, healthcare reform, or foreign policy decisions, and crafted clear, compelling responses. But what set Obama apart was his focus on storytelling. While Vance relied heavily on data and anecdotes to make his case, Obama leaned into emotion. He knew that facts alone wouldn't win over the audience. People needed to feel something. They needed to see themselves in the story he was telling. So he dug deep into his memory, pulling out examples of real people whose lives had been transformed by his policies. There was the factory worker who got retrained for a new job after losing their old one, the single mom who finally had access to affordable health care, the veteran who received better care because of expanded services. Each story was carefully chosen to highlight the human impact of his presidency. As the days ticked closer to the rumored debate date, speculation grew louder. Would it happen? Where would it take place? Who would moderate? The media churned out endless analysis, dissecting every possible scenario. Supporters of both men weighed in, arguing passionately about who had the upper hand. Some believed Vance's fiery energy and relatability gave him an edge, especially among working-class voters. Others pointed to Obama's unmatched experience and poise, predicting he would dominate the conversation. What made this build-up so fascinating was how personal it felt. This wasn't just a clash of ideologies, it was a battle of personalities. Vance represented the voice of frustration, the anger and disillusionment felt by those who believed the system had failed them. Obama embodied hope and resilience, the belief that progress was possible even in the face of challenges. Both men tapped into deeply held emotions, making the stakes feel incredibly high. And then there was the symbolism of it all. Vance, the newcomer from humble beginnings, taking on Obama, the polished former president who had risen to power through education and ambition. Their backgrounds reflected two very different versions of America, one rooted in tradition and struggle, the other defined by innovation and opportunity. Watching them go head-to-head wasn't just about politics, it was about identity. Which version of America would prevail? The anticipation was palpable, not just among the public, but within their teams as well. Everyone involved knew this could be a turning point, not just for Vance and Obama, but for the broader political landscape. A strong performance from Vance could catapult him onto the national stage, solidifying his status as a rising star in the Republican Party. Conversely, a decisive victory for Obama could silence critics and reinforce the enduring relevance of his vision. As the final details came together, both men stepped back to reflect on what this moment meant. For Vance, it was a chance to validate everything he'd fought for, to prove that his voice mattered and that he could stand toe-to-toe with the best of them. For Obama, it was an opportunity to remind people why they trusted him in the first place, to inspire hope and unity in a time of division. Neither man took this lightly. They knew the eyes of the nation would be on them, watching every word, every gesture, every reaction. And they knew that whatever happened, it would leave a lasting impression, not just on their careers, but on the country itself. When the day finally arrived, the atmosphere was electric. Millions tuned in, eager to see how this unlikely rivalry would play out. The stage was set, the lights were bright, and the tension was thick. As both men walked onto the platform, shaking hands briefly before taking their seats, it was clear that this was more than just a debate. It was a collision of worlds, a test of ideas, values, and leadership styles that would resonate far beyond the confines of the event itself. No matter who won or lost, one thing was certain: this was a moment that would be remembered for years to come. The night of the debate finally arrived, and it felt like the entire nation was holding its breath. People gathered in living rooms, bars, and community centers, glued to their screens. Social media lit up with live updates, memes, and predictions. The energy was electric. Nobody wanted to miss a single moment of what promised to be one of the most intense political showdowns in recent memory. The stage was set in a grand auditorium filled with rows of eager spectators. Cameras lined the room, capturing every angle, while moderators prepared to keep the conversation focused. As J.D. Vance and Barack Obama walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. They exchanged a firm handshake before taking their seats, each man wearing an expression that hinted at confidence, but also the weight of what was about to unfold. The moderator opened with a broad question. What do you believe is the greatest challenge facing America today? It was a neutral starting point, designed to ease both participants into the discussion. But within minutes, the gloves were off. J.D. Vance wasted no time going on the offensive. He leaned forward, his voice steady, but charged with emotion. "Let me tell you something," he began, looking directly at Obama. "For years, we've heard politicians talk about helping working families, but when it comes down to it, nothing changes. Look at trade policies during your presidency. They sent jobs overseas and left small towns across this country struggling to survive." Obama didn't flinch. He listened carefully, nodding slightly as if acknowledging Vance's points before responding. When it was his turn to speak, he leaned back slightly, adopting the calm, measured tone that had become his trademark. "It's easy to criticize decisions after the fact," he said, locking eyes with Vance. "But governing is complicated. You can't solve decades of economic shifts overnight. Yes, there were challenges, but we also made progress. We created millions of new jobs, invested in retraining programs, and helped communities rebuild." The exchange quickly escalated. Vance accused Obama of being out of touch with rural America, pointing to industries that collapsed under his watch. Obama countered by highlighting achievements like healthcare reform and economic recovery after the Great Recession. Each rebuttal was sharp, calculated, and delivered with precision. The audience hung on every word, erupting in applause whenever one side landed a particularly strong point. But the real turning point came when J.D. Vance unveiled a surprise tactic, a series of testimonials from individuals who claimed their lives worsened under Obama's presidency. One woman stepped forward, her voice trembling as she shared her story. She talked about losing her job at a manufacturing plant after a trade agreement was signed, leaving her family scrambling to make ends meet. Her words painted a vivid picture of pain and frustration, resonating deeply with many in the audience. For a brief moment, Obama seemed caught off guard. His usual composure faltered as he listened to her heartfelt account. But then, something remarkable happened. Instead of retreating or deflecting, Obama leaned into the vulnerability of the moment. He acknowledged her pain, admitting that no, presidency is perfect and that some decisions inevitably hurt certain groups more than others. "You're absolutely right," he said softly, his tone sincere. "Your story matters and I hear you. Governing means making tough choices, and sometimes those choices have unintended consequences. But I never stopped believing in the possibility of progress. That's why we worked so hard to create safety nets to help people like you get back on their feet. It was a masterful pivot. By validating the woman's experience and admitting imperfections in his administration, Obama humanized himself. He reminded everyone that behind every policy, decision were real people with real struggles. This wasn't just about numbers or abstract ideas. It was about lives. Vance tried to regain momentum, pressing further on issues like income inequality and access to resources. But Obama's shift in tone had changed the dynamic of the debate. Where Vance relied on fiery rhetoric and bold accusations, Obama now focused on empathy and connection. He spoke about the importance of listening to diverse perspectives and finding common ground, even in the face of disagreement. As the night wore on, both men delivered powerful performances. Vance's passion and relatability struck a chord with many viewers, especially those who felt overlooked by traditional politics. His ability to channel anger and frustration into actionable critiques made him a compelling figure. Meanwhile, Obama's grace under pressure and unwavering commitment to his vision inspired admiration among supporters. His ability to admit mistakes while standing firmly by his principles showcased the depth of his leadership. By the end of the debate, it was clear that neither man had completely dominated the other. Both had moments of brilliance and areas where they stumbled. But what truly stood out was the emotional resonance of the event. This wasn't just a battle of ideologies. It was a clash of humanity. People saw themselves reflected in the stories shared, the struggles discussed, and the hopes expressed. When the final question was asked and the closing statements delivered, the audience erupted into applause once again. As Vance and Obama shook hands, there was a sense of mutual respect, despite their differences. They may not have agreed on much, but both understood the gravity of the moment and the responsibility they carried as public figures. In the days that followed, reactions poured in from all corners of society. Conservatives hailed J.D. Vance as a fearless truth-teller who exposed cracks in Obama's polished image. Progressives rallied around their former president, praising his grace under pressure and unwavering dedication to equality. Analysts debated endlessly over who won the debate, dissecting every exchange and gesture for clues. Social media buzzed with hashtags like gloves off and legacy on trial, reflecting the cultural significance of the event. Clips of key moments went viral, sparking conversations about everything from economic policy to the role of empathy in leadership. Late-night comedians joked about the heated exchanges, adding humor to the mix while keeping the story alive in the public consciousness. Polls showed mixed results. Some segments of the population sided with Vance's critiques, agreeing that Obama's policies hadn't done enough for struggling communities. Others reaffirmed their admiration for Obama, crediting him with laying the groundwork for progress, despite challenges. What was undeniable, however, was the impact of the debate itself. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about the state of the nation and the complexities of leadership. For J.D. Vance, the aftermath brought both opportunities and challenges. His profile skyrocketed, solidifying his status as a rising star within the Republican Party. Invitations to speak at prestigious events flooded in, and donors opened their wallets to support his growing influence. But he also faced criticism from opponents who accused him of exploiting divisions for personal gain. Was he genuinely fighting for the forgotten, or was he simply advancing his career? Barack Obama, meanwhile, emerged from the debate with renewed determination. While bruised by some of Vance's attacks, he used the experience as a reminder of the enduring challenges of leadership. In private conversations, he admitted that the criticisms forced him to reflect on areas where his administration might have fallen short. This rare display of humility only deepened his connection with supporters, reinforcing his reputation as a leader willing to learn and grow. The debate became more than just a contest between two men. It became a catalyst for broader conversations about the future of America. It highlighted the tension between tradition and progress, between frustration and hope. And while neither Vance nor Obama walked away with a decisive victory, they both succeeded in one crucial way. They reminded people of the power of dialogue. As the dust settled and life returned to normal, whispers of another confrontation began circulating. Would Vance push further, aiming to cement his place as Obama's nemesis? Or would Obama find a way to turn the tide decisively? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The gloves-off showdown had left an indelible mark on the nation's psyche, proving once again that politics isn't just about winning or losing. It's about the stories we tell, the values we stand for, and the humanity we bring to the table. In the days and weeks following the debate, the ripple effects were felt across the nation. It wasn't just a political event anymore. It had become a cultural moment, sparking conversations in homes, workplaces, and communities. People couldn't stop talking about it. Whether they agreed with J.D. Vance or Barack Obama, everyone seemed to have an opinion. The debate had tapped into something deeper than policy disagreements. It had exposed raw emotions, frustrations, and hopes that many Americans had been carrying silently for years. For J.D. Vance, the aftermath was a whirlwind of attention. His fiery performance on stage earned him praise from conservatives who saw him as a bold voice unafraid to challenge the establishment. Supporters hailed him as someone who truly understood their struggles, someone who could articulate the pain of being left behind by globalization, automation, and shifting economic priorities. Media appearances poured in, and he found himself invited to speak at rallies, conferences, and even late-night talk shows. His book sales surged again and his social media following skyrocketed. For a man who had entered politics relatively recently, this level of visibility was unprecedented. But fame came with its own set of challenges. Critics were quick to pounce, accusing Vance of exploiting divisions for personal gain. They argued that while his rhetoric sounded passionate, it lacked concrete solutions. "He's great at pointing out problems," one commentator said during a televised panel discussion. "But where are the answers? Where's the plan to fix things?" Others questioned whether his criticisms of Obama were fair, pointing out that no administration could solve all the issues facing rural America overnight. Vance's opponents painted him as more of a provocateur than a problem solver, a label he struggled to shake. Despite the backlash, Vance didn't retreat. Instead, he doubled down on his mission to connect with everyday people, especially those living in areas hit hardest by economic decline. He embarked on what he called a listening tour, traveling to small towns and forgotten corners of the country. At each stop, he met with residents sitting down at kitchen tables, factory floors, and community centers to hear their stories firsthand. These encounters revealed a side of Vance rarely seen before: empathetic, vulnerable, and willing to admit when he didn't have all the answers. One such meeting took place in a struggling Midwest town where a local manufacturing plant had shut down years earlier. A group of former workers gathered in a dimly lit church basement to share their experiences with Vance. One man spoke about how losing his job had led to the collapse of his marriage. Another woman talked about taking multiple low-paying gigs just to keep food on the table for her kids. Their stories were heartbreaking but familiar, echoing the same themes Vance had written about in Hillbilly Elegy. This time, though, Vance listened more than he spoke. When it was his turn to address the group, his tone was softer, less combative. "I don't pretend to have all the solutions," he admitted. "But I do believe we can do better. For you, for your families, and for communities like this one." It was a subtle shift in approach, but it resonated deeply with those in the room. By focusing less on attacking Obama and more on crafting practical solutions, Vance began rebuilding trust with skeptics who doubted his sincerity. Meanwhile, Barack Obama faced his own reckoning in the wake of the debate. While his performance had been widely praised, particularly for his grace under pressure, the criticisms leveled by Vance lingered in the minds of some voters. Could he have done more to help struggling communities? Had his administration overlooked certain groups in favor of others? These questions gnawed at him, not because he doubted his intentions, but because he knew leadership was never perfect. Every decision carried trade-offs and not everyone benefited equally. Determined to address these concerns, Obama decided to take action. He traveled to Appalachia, the very region J.D. Vance often championed, to deliver a speech at a community center packed with locals. Standing behind a simple podium, he spoke candidly about the complexities of governing and the limitations of presidential power. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It requires patience, perseverance, and partnership. And yes, there will be setbacks along the way." He went on to acknowledge the pain felt by many in the audience, sharing stories of families who had benefited from programs implemented during his presidency, but also admitting that not every promise had been fulfilled. "We tried," he said, earnestly. "And maybe we didn't get everything right, but giving up isn't an option. Neither is turning against each other. We're stronger when we work together." The speech struck a chord, earning applause not just from Democrats but from independents and even some Republicans in attendance. It was a reminder of why so many people had trusted Obama in the first place: his ability to unite rather than divide, to inspire hope even in difficult times. By addressing the criticisms head-on and reaffirming his commitment to progress, he managed to turn potential weaknesses into strengths. As both men continued navigating the fallout from the debate, it became clear that their rivalry was evolving. What had started as a bitter clash over policy and legacy was slowly transforming into something more nuanced. Vance's focus shifted toward finding tangible ways to help struggling communities, while Obama emphasized unity and collaboration. Though their approaches differed, both seemed to recognize the importance of listening to the American people and responding with empathy. Public interest remained high as rumors of another confrontation swirled. Would Vance push further, aiming to cement his place as Obama's nemesis? Or would Obama find a way to bridge the gap between them, proving that dialogue could overcome division? Analysts debated endlessly, speculating about the next move in this high-stakes game of political chess. What made this chapter so compelling was how human it felt. Both Vance and Obama were grappling with the same fundamental question: how do you lead in a time of uncertainty? Their journeys weren't just about winning arguments or scoring points. They were about growth, reflection, and the pursuit of a better future. Each step they took, whether it was Vance's listening tour or Obama's heartfelt speech in Appalachia, brought them closer to understanding the weight of their responsibilities. By the end of this period, neither man emerged entirely victorious in the traditional sense. Vance still faced skepticism from critics, while Obama couldn't fully silence doubts about his legacy. But something important had changed. The gloves-off showdown had forced both of them to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about themselves, but about the nation they sought to serve. And in doing so, they reminded everyone watching that politics isn't just about winners and losers. It's about people. Real people with real lives, dreams, and struggles. And sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is listen. Months had passed since the heated debate between J.D. Vance and Barack Obama, but its impact lingered like the aftershock of an earthquake. The nation was still processing what it meant, not just for these two men, but for the broader conversation about America's future. While their rivalry had once seemed like a battle to the death, it gradually transformed into something more reflective, more human. It became less about who won or lost and more about how both men responded to the challenges laid bare by their clash. For J.D. Vance, the months following the debate were a whirlwind of highs and lows. On one hand, his profile had never been higher. He was now a household name, recognized not just as the author of Hillbilly Elegy, but as a rising political figure with a bold vision for rural America. His fiery critiques of Obama-era policies had struck a chord with many voters, especially those in working-class communities who felt abandoned by the system. Conservative media outlets hailed him as a truth-teller, someone unafraid to take on even the most revered figures in politics. But fame is a double-edged sword, and Vance quickly learned that being in the spotlight came with scrutiny. Critics began dissecting his every move, questioning whether he truly understood the complexities of the issues he so passionately criticized. Some accused him of exploiting divisions for personal gain, arguing that his rhetoric lacked concrete solutions. Others pointed out inconsistencies in his arguments, suggesting that while he was good at diagnosing problems, he hadn't offered enough ideas for fixing them. Determined to prove his critics wrong, Vance shifted gears. Instead of focusing solely on attacking Obama's legacy, he turned his attention to crafting actionable policies designed to help struggling communities. He proposed initiatives aimed at revitalizing manufacturing industries, expanding access to affordable health care in rural areas, and investing in education programs tailored to local needs. These proposals weren't perfect. Some experts argued they didn't go far enough, but they signaled a willingness to roll up his sleeves and get to work. Vance also continued his listening tour, visiting towns across the country where economic decline had left deep scars. In each place, he sat down with residents, hearing their stories without judgment and learning firsthand about the challenges they faced daily. These interactions changed him in subtle but significant ways. Gone was the brash provocateur who thrived on confrontation. In his place stood a man humbled by the realization that leadership required more than just fiery speeches. It demanded empathy, patience, and a commitment to finding common ground. Barack Obama, meanwhile, found himself reflecting deeply on the lessons of the debate. Though he remained a towering figure in American politics, the criticisms leveled by Vance stayed with him. They forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his presidency, truths he couldn't ignore simply because they came from an opponent. Had he done enough to help struggling communities? Could he have pushed harder for policies that benefited rural America? These questions weighed heavily on him, not because he doubted his intentions, but because he knew leadership was never perfect. Rather than retreat, Obama leaned into these reflections. He used the platform he still commanded to advocate for unity and collaboration, urging Americans to focus less on partisan divides and more on shared goals. In speeches and interviews, he reminded people that progress wasn't linear. It required persistence, compromise, and a willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints. He acknowledged mistakes made during his administration, but framed them as opportunities to learn and grow rather than failures to be ashamed of. One particularly poignant moment came when Obama returned to Appalachia several months later to host a town hall meeting. The event drew a diverse crowd, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, all eager to hear what he had to say. Sitting in a circle with community leaders and ordinary citizens, Obama listened intently as attendees shared their concerns about jobs, healthcare, and education. When it was his turn to speak, he admitted that no presidency could solve every problem overnight. "Change takes time," he said, his voice filled with conviction, "and it requires all of us working together." His words resonated deeply, earning applause not just from supporters but from skeptics who appreciated his honesty. By embracing vulnerability and humility, Obama reinforced why so many people trusted him in the first place. He wasn't afraid to admit imperfections, nor was he willing to let criticism deter him from pursuing a better future. As both men moved forward, their paths began to diverge in meaningful ways. For Vance, the journey was about proving himself, not just as a critic but as a leader capable of delivering real results. He threw himself into legislative efforts, partnering with unlikely allies to push through reforms aimed at helping forgotten communities. Some of his initiatives succeeded, others stumbled, but each step brought him closer to understanding the weight of responsibility that came with power. Obama, on the other hand, focused on inspiring hope and fostering dialogue. He traveled extensively, speaking at schools, churches, and community centers, always emphasizing the importance of empathy and collaboration. Whether addressing young activists or seasoned politicians, he reminded everyone that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about asking the right questions and bringing people together to find solutions. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that neither man had emerged entirely triumphant in the traditional sense. Vance still faced skepticism from critics, while Obama couldn't erase doubts about his legacy. But something remarkable had happened. Their rivalry had evolved into a shared pursuit of progress. Though they remained on opposite ends of the ideological spectrum, both recognized the value of listening, learning, and growing. The gloves-off showdown that had once seemed like a bitter feud ultimately paved the way for reconciliation, not between Vance and Obama themselves, but within the nation they sought to serve. Their journey reminded Americans that disagreements don't have to divide us. They can push us to reflect, adapt, and strive for something better. When asked about the experience years later, both men spoke candidly about its impact. Vance admitted that confronting Obama had forced him to grow as a leader, teaching him the importance of balancing passion with pragmatism. Obama, ever the optimist, described it as a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there's always room for connection and understanding. In the end, the story of J.D. Vance and Barack Obama wasn't just about politics. It was about humanity. It was about two men navigating the messy, complicated terrain of leadership, driven by vastly different visions, but united by a shared desire to make a difference. And though the gloves may have come off during their battle, they ultimately helped heal wounds, one conversation, one policy, and one handshake at a time.